It's great to see so many of you. Just your commitment and interest to want to learn more about how to speak up for life and for those who cannot speak for themselves is just really warms our hearts. We're so grateful. We know so many of you provide prayer support for us, financial support, volunteer support, and we're just so grateful for that. Please know that. We're thankful. This idea was really started by Samuel Green, who's going to speak tonight. He reached out to me about speaking, and when you hear his bio, you're going to be really impressed with his credentials. We're really blessed to have him come and speak. And the Lord just put together 3 nights, so we hope that you will, if you're available, come to all 3 nights, the next 2 Thursday nights. But we're very encouraged to see all of you show up, so thank you so much. Abortion is legal in the state of Virginia through 26 weeks, 6 days, and really up to birth with a note from 2 doctors just saying it's detrimental to your health, and that can mean mental health. So one of the reasons that we wanted to do this, the proposed abortion amendment will enshrine abortion into our state constitution to birth without limit, will allow abortions to be performed anytime, anywhere, by anyone, and removes all parental consent or notification for minors. If it becomes a fundamental right in Virginia, pregnancy centers like ours could be seen as infringing, burdening, or denying these rights simply because we don't offer abortions. And because we do use AdWords, we do provide abortion education information, so that could be seen as an infringement on someone's right, fundamental right to abortion. Legal experts believe that could open the door to devastating lawsuits or new regulations that would make it nearly impossible for us as a pregnancy center to continue serving the women and men who need us the most. So imagine a future where our center is shut down, not because we did something wrong, but because we infringed on a right to abortion. Imagine a Virginia where no voice is left to offer women real choice and real care. So the amendment has already passed through the General Assembly, as many of you probably already know. It was voted on back in January. It'll be voted on a second time in January of 2026 after we get through this election. So if the House of Delegates election in November 4th results in a pro-abortion majority once again, the amendment will pass in January, and it'll be voted on as a ballot initiative in November of 2026. It would take a miracle from the Lord not to pass when it gets to that point, because current polling is 61-39 in favor of the amendment in the state of Virginia. But here's the good news. We do have an opportunity to stop it. The political reality is this. The House of Delegates is currently 51-49 pro-abortion. That's how it passed. If we can flip a couple of seats to people who would vote against the amendment, we can kill that abortion amendment on the House floor. This may be our only chance to do that. So the Blue Ridge Pregnancy Center, as you know, of course, is not a political organization. We do not endorse candidates or parties. But however, there are times when legislative matters weigh so heavily on the work that we do and the people that we serve that we cannot afford to be silent. And this is one of those times, and we need your help. And this is kind of our moment. So some things that you can do is get informed about what the amendment really says, which is what we're here to do to help you learn tonight. Know where your local House of Delegates candidate stands on life, and vote pro-life on November 4th. Early voting begins this Friday. Is that right, Teresa? And I just want to mention a couple of things that we have back there. So we have our Blue Ridge Pregnancy Center ministry table back there with everything you would ever want to know about us and how to get involved and all those things. Also, shameless plug, our annual banquet's coming up on Saturday, October 18th. We do expect it to be a very full event. Our speaker is Nick Freitas, and especially with recent events, I think a lot of people are following and listening to him and will want to come hear him. So I encourage you to RSVP early. You can go to our website for that, brpcfriends.org. So anyway, all that's back there. Banquet invitations are back there. We also have Teresa Pregnall here with us tonight. She is the Virginia State Director of Concerned Women of America and also one of our BRPC board members. And she's got her CWA table back there, so if anything interests you there, she's got a lot of information that would be good for you to know about. And A couple of other things I want to draw your attention to is abortion extremism in Virginia. I encourage you, on the tables back there, pick up one of these before you leave tonight. This just gives you an overview. Because we are the only southern state that has no restrictions or bans on abortion, we've become an abortion destination state. And so women are coming to this state across state lines from all the surrounding states, some of them even further away. But especially, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, even Texas. So we've become, an extreme abortion state already. So why do we need the amendment to be passed, right? It's because it's a deeper, darker reason. But we have, in the last few years, this will tell you, 5 new abortion facilities have opened in Virginia. And really a 6th one, although it's online, is the Satanic Right to Your Life abortion clinic. So this is something that is really important for you to know. That's back there. It's from the Family Foundation. In fact, we have Mike Morisi here tonight from the Family Foundation. Just wave back there, Mike. Thank you for being here. This tells you about the abortion amendment timeline. So it just tells you what I already said. The first step to passing that abortion amendment has already been done. It's been voted on. Next one's the election. Then it tells you second session January, then the ballot initiative. So we'd love for you to get that. This tells you a little bit more detail, just a little cheat sheet for the overview of what's at stake if this abortion amendment passes. And then we have a Virginia General Assembly report card also put out by the Family Foundation. I encourage you to grab one of those. All this is back there. So you can see for yourself how the candidates voted. So really important. We would love for you to pick those up. And I just want to do a little quick exercise. I'd like everybody to just stand up right where you are. Okay. If you're under the age of 18, please have a seat. I'm glad you're here, but please have a seat. If you are not a registered voter, please have a seat. Wow, that's amazing. If you did not vote in the last election, please have a seat. Again, amazing. So y'all won't need this information, it looks like, but if you were not registered to vote, we do have voters registration back there at the table next to the CWA table. So anyway, okay, that was great. And that's why we're going to defeat this amendment, Samuel. So with the Lord's help, of course. So I'm going to introduce Samuel to you, and I'm just going to read a little bio of his. So as a young child, Samuel Green felt called to help end abortion in the United States. That passion to save unborn children eventually led Samuel to found Reason for Life, where he now serves as president and general counsel. Before founding Reason for Life, Samuel spent 5 years at Alliance Defending Freedom, where he engaged in litigation to defend the sanctity of life, freedom of speech, and religious liberty. Samuel has also worked as a litigation associate at a large law firm, as a member of a presidential campaign's legal team, and as a law clerk to the Honorable Raymond W. Grunder of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 8th Circuit. Samuel finished first in his class at Pepperdine University School of Law, where he earned a Juris Doctorate degree in 2011. He also studied political science at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, which we said we won't hold against you, where he graduated. He graduated summa cum laude with a Bachelor of Arts degree in 2008. Samuel has provided legislative testimony, preached sermons about the sanctity of life, and given presentations across the country to various groups or their chapters, including Students for Life of America, Live Action, 40 Days for Life, Summit Ministries, Teen Pact Leadership Schools, the Federalist Society, the St. Thomas More Society, and the Christian Legal Society. Samuel has also participated in media interviews and published articles with various outlets, including Newsweek, The Hill, the Seattle Times, World, Washington Examiner, Arizona Capital Times, The Federalist, and the Daily Signal. Additionally, Samuel authored a legal brief in the historic Supreme Court case that overturned Roe v. Wade. Let's give Samuel a warm welcome.
Well, thank you for that very kind introduction, Jane, and that warm welcome. It is truly a joy to be with you all this evening. I want to say a very special thank you to Blue Ridge Pregnancy Center and Jane Oliver and her team for doing so much work to make this event possible. And also a thank you to Heritage Baptist Church for allowing us to use these wonderful facilities. I also thank each one of you for taking some of your limited and precious time to join us tonight to hopefully get equipped to be a voice for the voiceless, because your voice is so very important. As Jane was explaining, we are in a critical moment here in Virginia as there is an effort underway to make killing unborn children a right under your state constitution. And we are going to talk a lot about that. But I also want to emphasize that your efforts to change hearts and minds are valuable and critical regardless of political outcomes. If you are successful in convincing just one person about the sanctity of human life, the children in the womb are precious and deserve love and protection, you may save that person's child in the future. And that person may counsel family members and friends down the road to cherish and protect their children and choose life over death. In changing the views of just one person, you truly may save lives, and you may spare people from the suffering that so often follows a decision to turn to abortion. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your love for your neighbors, born and unborn. Now, we have a lot to cover tonight, and so just to sort of give you a roadmap of where we are heading, we're going to talk a bit about the problem of abortion within the church. We're going to talk about how to speak with others about the value of life and make the case for life from the Bible and from science and from logic. We are also going to consider the tragic reality of abortion here in the United States, and we're going to take a careful look at key parts of this proposed amendment to the Virginia Constitution so you can be more informed and warn other people about the measure. We're also going to talk about how we can respectfully urge the pastors of our congregations to preach about this important matter, and then we're going to have some Q&A time. So I look forward to some great questions from you all. Well, now that you kind of know where we are going, I want to start by emphasizing that we are going to see today that abortion is a sin, and it is a sin that has impacted many, many people in a very personal way, and those are both men and women. So I want to remind everyone here today that if Jesus is your Lord, and you have turned to him for forgiveness for having an abortion or encouraging someone else to have an abortion, then he has truly forgiven you. And if you have not sought forgiveness, I encourage you to make tonight the night that you do, because the Lord stands ready to forgive. As 1 John 1:9 assures us, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Yes, he will cleanse us and make us clean. He loves us regardless of our past, and that is a wonderful truth to us, for us to embrace for ourselves and to go share with others. You are here at a boot camp because you want to get trained up to go share with others, and I hope that that is exactly what you will do. And as you go talk with people about this very sensitive, delicate matter, it is almost certain that you will end up talking with some who have turned to abortion in the past. And that can cause people to raise defensive barriers to prevent them from hearing and internalizing the truth that you are sharing with them. Because it is very, very difficult for people to confront the reality that they took the life of their own child or encouraged someone else to kill a child. So please be sensitive to that dynamic that may be happening in your conversation, even if the person hasn't told you what is happening. Be sensitive, be loving and gracious in your approach, and perhaps use that conversation as an opportunity to share the good news of the gospel and the forgiveness that is available in Christ. And being sensitive to this dynamic, you will not only be more effective in your conversation, but you may have additional ministry opportunities as well. Now, as we think about talking with others, as I mentioned, want to focus some time on reaching churchgoers with the truth about abortion. And some of you may be thinking, wait a minute, aren't people in church already pro-life? Well, many of them are, but sadly, many of them are not. In 2023, a study was conducted by George Barna with the Family Research Council, and it revealed that even when the life of a mother is not in jeopardy, only 54% of churchgoers believe that the Bible teaches abortion is wrong. So put another way, if there were 100 churchgoers in the room and I said, okay, picture this, y'all. There's a woman, she's pregnant, her life is not in danger. If you know the Bible teaches it would be wrong for her to have an abortion, raise your hand. Only 54 of the hands are going up, so just barely over half. That means that almost half of churchgoers need to be taught how God views children in the womb. And if they are not taught the truth, there will be deadly consequences. In fact, a study was conducted back in 2015 and sponsored by CareNet. It revealed that at the time women were obtaining their first abortion, 36% of them were simultaneously attending church. So if we could just convince those in our churches to not turn to abortion themselves, we could save more than 350,000 children's lives every single year in America. Well, in addition to professing Christians turning to abortion themselves, they are also supporting it elsewhere. Just consider the state of Ohio, which is one of the many states that in the last few years has tragically added abortion as a right under their state constitution. Well, there was an exit poll conducted in Ohio during that election, and assuming that the exit poll accurately reflected the electorate as a whole, that poll showed that this deadly measure in Ohio would not have passed if those who took the time to vote and identified as born-again or evangelical Christians had all simply voted against the measure. But the pro-abortion measure did pass because it had the help of many professing Christians who voted to make it a state constitutional right to kill children made in the image of God. That's probably not what they were thinking as they cast their vote, but that is the tragic reality of their behavior. And that drives home the need for us to win over the church for the cause of life, for the cause of the most innocent and vulnerable. But just as you now know that we need to awaken the church, the abortion lobby knows it needs to keep Christians blind to the evil of abortion. And they are not being shy about reaching the church with their lies. Just to give you a few examples, one group was brazen enough to put up a billboard saying, "God's plan includes abortion." It's horrific. As another example, a current United States senator has repeatedly promoted himself as a, quote, pro-choice pastor. Well, if a pastor calls himself pro-choice, the message to Christians is, you should be pro-choice as well. You should support abortion. In fact, I'll show you an ad that pushes that lie very directly. I already mentioned that Ohio passed this deadly abortion measure with the help of professing Christians. That did not happen by accident. The abortion lobby ran an ad in Ohio specifically targeting churchgoers. And I'm just going to show you one of those ads now.
Do not judge, and you will not be judged. It's good advice every day. As a pastor, I've counseled families on the most important personal decisions, even abortion. Abortion is a private family decision. Government needs to stay out of family decision-making. That's what issue 1 is all about. It gives families the freedom to make their own decisions without judgment and without the government getting involved. Vote yes.
Isn't that wild? You have this pastor, this wolf in sheep's clothing, basically telling people that there should be a right to kill children in the womb. And if you, Christian, if you try to stop them, you're violating the Bible. That's what this man is saying. He's saying you are judging. Well, under that flawed theory, we ought to allow theft and we should allow child abuse. Otherwise, we're judging people who just want to steal and just want to abuse children. Well, when you put it that way, the absurdity of the argument becomes clear. But there's obviously nothing wrong with laws prohibiting theft, child abuse, or abortion. Yet the abortion industry is misrepresenting the Bible in hopes that they will be able to deceive some Christians and get them to support abortion, thinking that that's actually the right thing to do. And they will probably misuse the Bible and religious imagery and messaging here in Virginia if this abortion measure makes it to the ballot. So you can begin shining a light in the darkness now. You can prepare people to recognize the abortion industry's lies by sharing the truth about the sanctity of human life. And again, beyond concerns about this measure, simply helping Christians understand the truth about the sanctity of life is an opportunity for you to save lives. Now, one way to reach churchgoers with the truth is by presenting them with a convincing case for life from the Bible. So we're going to look at one of the ways you can do that. If you're talking with a Bible believer who believes abortion is okay, you can start by establishing some common ground. You can talk about some points in common that you share with them. One point is that human beings are uniquely precious. Hopefully they agree with that. You can remind them about Genesis chapter 1, which tells us that human life is precious because human beings, males and females, were made by God in the image of God. That tells us that human life is uniquely precious and valuable. The fact that we're made in the image of God is the source of our human dignity. And with life being so precious, that is what makes murdering an innocent person such a serious crime. So you can remind people what it says in the 10 Commandments: do not murder. So you have these points of common ground here. Life is precious, and we're not supposed to take human life. That leaves us with one key question when it comes to the abortion controversy. And that is, are unborn children humans made in the image of God who are precious to Him, or are they not? Because if they are, then we know that they deserve protection and that abortion does violate the murder prohibition in the 10 Commandments. Well, fortunately, the Bible does not leave us guessing about this question. It makes clear that children in the womb are humans, just like everyone in the room today, and that they are precious in the eyes of God. So we're going to look at 3 of my favorite biblical passages to demonstrate these truths. And you might not be able to pull out all the passages in one conversation, but you can try to think about what passage would be most valuable. One account is found in the first chapter of Luke, which many read around Christmas time each year. And we read about how Mary was greeted by the angel Gabriel and told that she was going to bear a very special son, Jesus. And then Mary, while pregnant with Jesus, went to visit her relative Elizabeth, who at that time was pregnant with John the Baptist. And so we're now about to have a meeting of 4 people, 2 women and the 2 baby boys they were carrying inside them. Something amazing happened. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, verses 41 and 44 tell us that Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit, and John the Baptist leaped for joy in Elizabeth's womb. Now John, there in the womb, is experiencing an emotion, the emotion of joy, and he's leaping as a result. The Bible doesn't tell us why he was experiencing joy, but maybe he knew, despite being hidden in his mother's womb, that he was in the presence of his Savior, Jesus, who was also hidden in his mother's womb. Now, there are some out there who argue that a pregnant woman's womb contains nothing more than a meaningless mass of cells. So if you're talking with a Bible believer who has adopted that lie, you can point them to Luke chapter 1. You can help them think about, well, does a meaningless blob of cells experience emotions and leap as a result of the emotion? Well, of course not. But if you look at little children, they jump for joy, and John the Baptist jumped for joy while in the womb, being fully human and even then. In fact, not only did John leap for joy in the womb, but in Luke 1 verse 15, the angel Gabriel said that John would be filled with the Holy Spirit even before his birth. So God looked upon this child who had never even taken a single breath and valued him so greatly that he filled him with the Holy Spirit. And because of that, we know that unborn children are very precious to God. If they are very precious to Him, they should be precious to all who claim to follow the Lord. It's also enlightening to consider Mary and Jesus here. Because Elizabeth said in verse 43, "Why am I so favored that the mother of my Lord should come to me?" So she was recognizing that Mary, while pregnant, was a mother. Not that she was a mother-to-be or that she was maybe going to be a mother one day if she gave birth one day. No, she was recognizing her as a mother then because she already had a child, the child living inside of her. Now that child, Jesus, is one that I think Christians often think of as first coming to us as both God and man, as that adorable little baby wrapped in swaddling cloths, lying in a manger. But that is not really the beginning of the story. Because Elizabeth, right after being filled with the Holy Spirit, refers to Jesus as her Lord while he was still in the womb, while he was probably still in the embryonic stage of development, because that is exactly who he was, even there in the early part of his human existence. You know, I think it's notable that Jesus, being God, could have come in human form at any point in the spectrum of human development. He could have come as a baby in a manger, or as a toddler, or a teenager, or an adult. So as you're talking with someone and helping them assess, well, when does human life really begin? I think it's notable to point out that Jesus decided to begin his human experience when all human lives begin, long before birth, all the way back at conception. So we'll turn from Luke 1 to another enlightening biblical passage. I hope you remember the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So the last on the list, Jacob, was a twin. Full disclosure, this is not really a picture of Jacob and Esau, in case any of you are wondering. You know, lawyers have to give the disclaimers even when they're obvious. But anyway, it is a fitting photo, though, because Jacob and Esau did not always get along very well, to put it mildly. You may recall that when they were older, Jacob actually deceived his father to steal Esau's blessing. I got that right. Jacob deceived his father to steal Esau's blessing. Esau was so mad about it that he decided he was going to try to kill Jacob. And then Jacob decided he better get out of town in a hurry before that happened. You know, so if any of you dealing with sibling rivalry problems in your families, like I hope they're not as severe as Jacob and Esau's. If they are, seek help immediately. But you know, we're not here to talk about sibling rivalry per se. But what's interesting for the purposes of our discussion tonight is that the tension between these brothers actually started before they were born. In Genesis 25, verses 21 through 23, we learn that God allowed Rebekah to conceive Jacob and Esau, and that, quote, the children struggled together within her. And the struggle between these unborn brothers was apparently so intense that Rebekah actually went to the Lord to ask about what in the world was happening inside of her. And the Lord answered her inquiry, and he told her, quote, 2 nations are in your womb. So I want us to consider a few things about this passage. One is that many translations of the Bible refer to Jacob and Esau in the womb as, quote, the children. Not as products of conception or pregnancy tissue or blobs of cells, not as parasites, but children. And the Bible says that the children, quote, struggled together while they were still in the womb. So as we reflect on this passage, we should realize, you know what? If Jacob and Esau were not actually living people in the womb, then we would not see their intense sibling rivalry begin there. And yet we do. We see their personalities as unique individuals already on display in the womb. So the humanity of unborn children and the fact that they truly are distinct individuals really comes through in this passage in Genesis chapter 25. Turning to another helpful biblical example, you may remember Samson, supernaturally strong man with long hair who killed a lion with his bare hands and pushed over pillars to bring down a Philistine temple. Does that ring a bell for some of you from Sunday school and stuff? Yeah. Okay, good. So Samson was a Nazirite. That is a person consecrated to God in a special way who has to observe certain special rules. One of the rules is no hair cutting, hence the long hair. It wasn't just a fashion statement for Samson. There's also dietary restrictions. They're not allowed to eat or drink certain things. Do any of you know when Samson became a Nazirite? It was actually before he was born. In Judges 13, verses 3 through 7, there's an account of the angel of the Lord appearing to Samson's mother, telling her she is going to conceive and bear a son. And then he starts giving her instructions. And he starts saying, don't eat these things, don't drink these things. Why? Well, because Samson is to be a Nazarite to God from the womb. So this is quite illuminating. You've probably all heard the mantra, my body, my choice, that some use to try to justify abortion. So if you're talking with a Bible-believing friend who has adopted that mantra, you can turn to Judges 13, because this passage dispels that notion. It teaches us something that science also teaches, that when a woman is pregnant with one child, there are two bodies involved. There's the body of the mother and the body of the child within her. So if a woman decides to have an abortion, she's not just making a decision about her body. She's making a decision that tragically ends the life of her child. Now notice here in this passage that God did not call Samson's mother to be a Nazarite. She wasn't a Nazarite, but she had to follow the dietary rules of the Nazarites while she was pregnant so that the son she carried could follow the vows of a Nazarite while he was an unborn baby. And that mattered to God. Why? Well, because Samson was the same person in the womb that he was outside the womb. There was nothing about birth that somehow transformed Samson like into someone who was valuable in the sight of God. No, he was precious to God before birth, just as he was after birth. Indeed, he was Samson the Nazarite to God in the womb, just as he was Samson the Nazarite to God battling with that lion. So just to recap, we have John the Baptist being filled with the Holy Spirit and leaping for joy in the womb. We have Mary being recognized as a mother when her only child was in the womb. We have Jesus being called Lord while in the womb. We have Jacob and Esau beginning their struggle with one another in the womb. And we have Samson, with his mother's cooperation, observing the dietary rules of the Nazarites while in the womb. So this is powerful biblical evidence that we can share with others to demonstrate that unborn children are in fact human beings and that God values them just as he values those who are walking and talking. That does mean that abortion is the sin of murder. And if we are going to love our neighbors as ourselves, as we have been commanded, we should work to end the killing. Now, for the Bible believers you talk to who could still use some convincing, or for those you're talking to who have not yet accepted the Bible as true, you can also establish the humanity of children in the womb by sharing scientific truths about unborn children. So we're going to explore some of the science together. Dr. Jerome Lejeune was an accomplished geneticist. In fact, he is the one who discovered the chromosome composition that results in Down syndrome. And Dr. Lejeune said, life has a very long history, but each of us has a very definite beginning, the moment of conception. And he had good reason to say this. After all, as he explained, the genetic makeup of a human being is complete from the moment of fertilization. As author Francis Beckwith put it, an unborn child's genetic makeup is established at conception, determining to a great extent her own individual physical characteristics: gender, eye color, bone structure, hair color, skin color, susceptibility to certain diseases, and so on. All established right when the human egg is fertilized. And then after conception, the speed of a child's development in the womb occurs at an astonishingly rapid rate. Dr. Lejeune explained that 1 month after conception, the tiny heart has already been beating for a week, and the arms, legs, head, and brain have already begun to take shape. At 2 months, the child has hands, feet, head, internal organs, brain, everything in place. Here's another fascinating fact. Starting about 8 weeks after conception, specialists can use ultrasounds to study children in the womb and determine whether it is likely that they are left-handed or right-handed. If a little child prefers sucking his left thumb in the womb, checking with him again when he's 10 years old, chances are he's left-handed. The opposite is true if he had preferred sucking his right thumb. Researchers also found that children respond to the taste of the foods that their mothers consume. It's really interesting when we think about the passage with Samson, right? Because Samson's mother was told not to eat the things that Nazarites aren't allowed to eat. Now from science we know children respond to the taste of the foods their mothers consume. And they found that if saccharin, an artificial sweetener, is injected into the amniotic fluid that the baby's swimming around in, the baby swallows more of the fluid. So it's like, ooh, drinking the sweetness. So, if any of you have been going for the cookies in the back, your sweet tooth may have developed even earlier than you realized. So, hearing about a child's development and how rapidly it occurs is one thing. It's another thing to see it. So, this illustration is provided by the Mayo Foundation for Medical Education and Research. It shows what a child looks like just 10 weeks after conception. And I'll note that 10 weeks after conception is generally considered 12 weeks gestational age. Well, now that you have seen this drawing and just how well-formed this child is so early in pregnancy, we're going to look at a short video clip showing actual footage of a child moving around in the womb just 9 weeks and 3 days after conception. Well, this goes by quick, so let's watch and learn.
The fetus can also grasp an object. Move the head forward and back. Open and close the jaw. Move the tongue, sigh and stretch. Nerve receptors in the face, the palms of the hands, and the soles of the feet can sense light touch.
Pretty amazing, right? So they don't have the best movie studio quality lighting there in the womb, but despite that deficit, I hope that you could still really see the fingers, nose, and mouth on that child right there in the first trimester of pregnancy. And I want to emphasize first trimester, because as you're talking with some people out there, they might tell you, like, look, I don't really like late-term abortion, but first trimester, sure, why not? Well, if a doctor were to kill a child of the same gestational age as the child in this video, or as a child in the illustration that we saw, they would be doing so in a first trimester abortion. We already saw that life begins from conception, so if you have a human life, that life should be protected. But also a lot of people just don't realize how rapidly children develop, even in the first trimester. So we know from all the scientific evidence that a living human being exists in the womb of a pregnant woman. There's a little boy or a little girl who is distinct from the mother. The child has a unique DNA that's never existed before, will never exist again. The child is sometimes of a different sex from the mother, in the case where she's pregnant with a son, and the child quickly develops a separate brain and a separate heart, and that child's little heart can be pumping through his or her body a blood type that is different from the blood type that the mother's heart is pumping through her own body. And yet, abortion kills these children, sometimes by poisoning, sometimes by starving, sometimes by crushing, sometimes by dismembering. It's absolutely horrific. Now, some who support this killing will actually acknowledge the reality that science tells us that abortion kills a living human being. But then we go on to argue, well, I acknowledge it's a human, but it's not a person worthy of protection like those who've been born. But anytime you have a biological human being, and then we start trying to decide whether that human meets some sort of additional qualifications to be considered valuable and worthy of protection as a person, we are in very, very dangerous territory. After all, if being a human does not entitle you to basic human rights, like the right to life, what does? So with that in mind, we're going to walk through some differences between children in the womb and those outside the womb. And we are going to see if any of these differences provide a legitimate, non-arbitrary basis to say unborn children are less valuable than the born. Spoiler alert, none of them provide a good reason, but we're going to walk through them. So other pro-life speakers before me have helpfully pointed out that the differences between the born and the unborn really fall into 4 categories that can be remembered with the acronym SLED, which stands for size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. So regarding size, we have Shaquille O'Neal, or Shaq, famous retired basketball player, and he's standing next to Jimmy Fallon, the host of The Tonight Show on NBC. Well, according to my internet research, Jimmy Fallon stands 6 feet tall, so he does have a few inches on me, sadly, but he looks kind of tiny there next to Shaq. He's wearing Shaq's suit jacket. It wraps around him like a blanket. So is Shaq more entitled to the right to life than Jimmy Fallon, and I think everyone here, just because he's bigger than all of us? Well, no. And similarly, while the child in the womb is smaller than us, that doesn't make the child any less valuable or less worthy of life. Just here's an interesting side note about Shaq. As hard as it is to picture when you're looking at this giant of a man, even he was once a tiny little baby in his mother's womb. And his mother happened to be a 17-year-old single girl. There are people who point to situations like that and say, well, this is why we need to have abortion. How could we let a child be born into such difficult circumstances? And you know what? The circumstances were difficult. Shaq's mother said that sometimes her family was short on food, they were sometimes short on clothing. But Shaq was able to go through those trials and come out stronger, and I'd say bigger. And I am pretty sure he is glad that his life was not cut short by abortion. All right, turning to our next distinction, we have level of development. So the child on the tricycle is probably not developed enough to ride the unicycle, but the child is still just as valuable as the more developed man. The same is true of unborn children. Yes, of course they are less developed than us, but you can be fully human without being fully developed. That's really good news for infants and toddlers and even teenagers, right? Because they are not fully developed, but they are still fully human and fully valuable. Now, within this level of development category, you may hear some people argue about consciousness or cognitive abilities as a way to determine value. But that argument falls short for a lot of reasons. You just take a smart dog, for instance, versus a child 2 weeks after birth. Okay, the smart dog is going to be way better at following commands and way more aware of its surroundings. But is that dog any more valuable than the 2-week-old child, the child 2 weeks after birth? Well, certainly not. Also, if any one of us were to be put under general anesthesia for a surgery, a doctor could literally cut into us and we won't respond to the pain of being cut. One of our friends could walk into the operating room and start talking about a topic that normally they can't get us to stop talking about because we love it so much, and we won't add one word to the conversation. They could put our favorite food right in front of our face and we won't try to take a bite of it. But if someone were to come into that operating room and intentionally kill us while we were unconscious, they would still be committing a terrible crime, the crime of murder. So it didn't matter that you were unconscious at the time. Similarly, while children in the womb may not have the level of consciousness that we do in this moment, in this room together, that does not mean it is okay to kill them. It does not mean that they are any less valuable than us. Now for environment, I'm going to say perhaps the most simple statement of the evening, which is that unborn children are in the womb and we are outside of the womb. Okay, but does our environment or our location determine our worth or value? Again, no. I mean, we would never say that an astronaut in space is less valuable than us because, they're way out in space and we're here on Earth and they have to wear a funny looking suit to survive and we don't. So if we would not say that, how could we say that the few inches separating the born from the unborn is somehow determinative of their value? We can't, at least not in any kind of logically consistent way. Then finally, we get to degree of dependency. Okay, does one's level of dependency on another determine their value? Again, no. When I have a chance to talk with high school students, middle school students, sometimes I'll tell them, if your parents left you home alone for a week while they went to Hawaii, and they left you with a refrigerator full of pizzas, they would probably come back after a week and you would have survived the ordeal. Okay, you might be super sick of pizza at that point. You might be really bummed you didn't get to go to Hawaii with them, but you'd have survived. But if parents left this child at home alone for a week with a refrigerator full of bottles of milk, they would return to a dead baby. They would go to jail because they didn't fulfill their duty to care for a child who needed them. Notice here that the infant actually needs somebody else's body in order to survive. Okay, it wasn't enough to have the bottles of milk in the refrigerator. The baby needed someone to use their body to get the milk out of the refrigerator and hold the baby in place and hold the bottle in place and feed and care for the baby. So I'll ask the teens I'm talking to, do you think the parents would be able to convince the police not to arrest them by saying, well, wait a minute, officer, Like, I shouldn't have to use my body to feed my baby. It's my body, my choice, right? Yeah, that argument's not going to fly. The cuffs are going on because these parents had a duty to use their bodies to care for a child who was fully dependent on them. And like the child in this picture, children in the womb are fully dependent, but also fully human and worthy of protection and care. So all of these ways that some may use to try to distinguish our value from the value of unborn children ultimately fail. And if someone tries to use one of these categories to create a dividing line between who they say has a right to life and who does not, they're just going to be drawing completely arbitrary lines. Who gets to set these additional arbitrary lines? It is never the vulnerable who are being targeted. We saw that with slavery in America, the Holocaust in Europe, and now we are seeing it with abortion today. As President Ronald Reagan once quipped, "I've noticed that everybody that is for abortion has already been born." We have to stick with these basic truths. If you are a human, you are entitled to human rights, the most basic of which is the right to life. Science shows us that children in the womb are humans. Therefore, children in the womb are entitled to the right to life. But sadly, our laws do not recognize that right. Many individuals do not recognize that right. So we need to take the truth that we know and go share it with others so that this tragedy will come to an end. To give you a sense of the extent of the tragedy, it is estimated that from 1973, which is when the U.S. Supreme Court issued its Roe versus Wade decision that imposed abortion on the nation, from 1973 to 2023, abortion was used to kill more than 65 million children here in the United States. That doesn't even include the death toll from last year or so far this year. I don't think we can ever fully wrap our minds around the loss of more than 65 million children, but I want us to try for a moment. So imagine you are abroad, you're visiting whatever country you've always dreamed of visiting, you're having a great time seeing all the sights, you go to sleep, you wake up one morning and you turn on the television or pull out your phone, and to your horror, you see that the United States has been hit with multiple nuclear attacks. Everyone in the city of Phoenix, in fact, all of Arizona, is now dead. The same is true in Nevada and Idaho, and the hard hits keep coming. Montana has been blown off the map. Wyoming and Utah are destroyed. Colorado and New Mexico are now only ash heaps. North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi, Wisconsin, West Virginia. All the people who were alive in those 20 states yesterday are now dead. If that happened, the death toll would be closely approximating the death toll of abortion here in the United States from 1973 to 2023. While Roe versus Wade is now thankfully behind us by God's grace, sadly the bloodshed continues. The pro-abortion Guttmacher Institute estimates that just last year, abortionists in the United States killed more than 1 million children. The estimate is that in 2024, more than 2,800 children were killed every single day here in America. And the bloodshed will continue unless people are convinced that it must end. And you can help convince them. I know it can be scary and uncomfortable, but God calls us to be courageous, and your voice can truly save lives with the Lord's help. In addition to going out and sharing about the beauty and complexity of human life in the womb, like the scientific and biblical information that we've already discussed, you can also help people understand the brutality of abortion. So to help with that, we are going to watch some clips of a doctor testifying before a congressional committee about a very common abortion procedure used for second trimester abortions. Now in this video, you are not going to see any images of the victims of abortion, but you are going to hear some really disturbing truths about the reality of abortion. I know while it's difficult to even listen to, it is important for us to understand it so that we can help others understand and confront the brutality of abortion. Because if people do not know the evil that is happening among them, they're unlikely to work to stop it, and they may even support it without knowing what they are truly supporting. So let's watch this doctor's testimony. The compiled clips I have here run just under 3 minutes, so please hang in there.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. I only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to get right to it. Second trimester D&E abortions performed between roughly 14 and 24 weeks of gestation. Your patient today is 17 years old. She's 22 weeks pregnant. Her baby is the length of your hand plus a couple of inches. And she's been feeling her baby kick for the last several weeks, but she's asleep on an operating room table. You walk into that operating room scrubbed and gowned, and after removing laminaria, you introduce a suction catheter into the uterus. This is a 14 French suction catheter. If she were 12 weeks pregnant or less, basically the width of your hand or smaller, you could basically do the entire procedure with this. But babies this big don't fit through catheters this size. After suctioning the amniotic fluid out from around the baby, you introduce an instrument called a Sofer clamp. It's about 13 inches long. It's made of stainless steel. The business end of this clamp is about 2.5 inches long and 1/2 inch wide. There are rows of sharp teeth. This is a grasping instrument. When it gets a hold of something, it does not let go. A D&E procedure is a blind abortion, so picture yourself introducing this and grabbing anything you can blindly and pull, and I do mean hard, and out pops a leg about that big, which you put down on the table next to you. Reach in again, pull out an arm about the same length, which you put down on the table next to you. And use this instrument again and again to tear out the spine, the intestines, the heart and lungs. Head on the baby that size is about the size of a large plum. Can't see it, but you pretty good idea you've got it if you've got your instrument around something and your fingers are spread about as far as they go. You know you did it right if you crush down on the instrument and white material runs out of the cervix. That was the baby's brains. Then you could pull out skull pieces. And you have a day like I had a lot of times. Sometimes a little face comes back and stares back at you. Congratulations, you just successfully performed a second trimester D&E abortion. You just affirmed her right to choose. You know, earlier on I described stacking up body parts on the side of the table. It's not to, gross people out, to use a simple term. When you do an abortion, you need to keep inventory. You have to make sure you get 2 arms and 2 legs and all the pieces. If you don't, your patient's going to come back infected, bleeding, or dead. You know, after over 1,200 abortions, first and second trimester up to 24 weeks and all the rest of it, and being very dedicated to it, for the first time in my life, I really looked at that pile of body parts on the side of the table. And I didn't see her wonderful right to choose, and I didn't see all the money I just made. All I could see was somebody's son or daughter. And I stopped doing late-term abortions after that, and several months later stopped doing all abortions.
I know that was tough to watch. That is the reality of abortion. We should help people to understand that. We should help them do what this doctor finally did. Move past slogans like right to choose and really look. And when those in our communities really look, hopefully they will recognize the cruelty and evil of abortion and reject it entirely. In Virginia, the need to get people to really look is particularly pressing. As we've mentioned before, Virginia voters are facing the possibility of a pro-abortion ballot measure. The measure is extreme. If it passes, the Virginia Constitution will attain a right to abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy. And because the Virginia Constitution is the highest state law, it'll tie the hands of the legislature in a way that is even more extreme than Roe versus Wade. So we are going to look at some of the actual language of this proposed amendment to your Constitution so that you can warn others about it. But before we dive into that, why don't we just go ahead, if you'd like, stand up for 30 seconds, get some blood to your legs, and since we're practicing to talk with others, maybe tell someone something new you learned so far, or just something that you found interesting or powerful. So yeah, we'll just do this for like 30 seconds here real quick. talk to you after, if that's okay. Yeah. So. Well, I see people saying things, so that's good news. I'm sorry to cut you off, but let's go ahead and sit back down because we still have a whole lot to cover. Okay. So we're going to look, as I said, at some of the actual language that would be added to the Virginia Constitution if this measure passes. In looking at the language, my hope is that you're going to become more equipped to persuade your friends and complete strangers that your warnings about this measure are valid. That you're not just using hyperbole to scare people, but that what you're saying is actually a true, valid warning. Now, as we look at this language, I will note that while I am a lawyer in some states, I am not a lawyer here in the Commonwealth, and I'm not providing legal advice tonight, so don't take what I say as legal advice, because it's not. So here's the proposed language to the Virginia Constitution. Unless you have exceptional vision, that's probably not very helpful, so don't panic. We are going to take a look at some of the particularly pertinent portions together. So here we see a statement that every individual has the fundamental right to reproductive freedom, including the ability to make and carry out decisions relating to abortion care and fertility care. So this is saying that abortion and fertility care are fundamental rights under the Virginia Constitution. And a fundamental right is the highest type of right available in constitutional law. Now we're going to focus tonight on the effort to make abortion a fundamental right, but I want to take a few moments just to talk about the fertility care here. So the Virginia Family Foundation has raised concern that this could be used to argue for gender transition hormones and surgeries because some of those relate to fertility or infertility. The other side says, oh no, this doesn't apply to what they call gender-affirming care, but that's very smart of them to say because they know that the horrors of gender transitions are not very popular at the moment. But if this measure does pass and gets into the Virginia Constitution, who knows what expansive interpretation of this amendment they are going to try to advance in the courts. One thing that the other side does admit is that this measure would apply to IVF, in vitro fertilization. That's where you fertilize a human egg in a laboratory, thereby creating a new, whole, separate, distinct human being. These children are just as precious as those conceived naturally, which makes it a terrible tragedy that IVF, as typically practiced, involves creating more children than parents plan to raise. And then those excess children are killed or frozen indefinitely. That is a very serious problem for all of us who believe the truth that human life begins at the moment of fertilization, and that each of these children are precious human beings made in the image of God. So with that said, I want to emphasize that just with abortion, if anyone here has turned to IVF in the past in a way where some children were intentionally killed or frozen indefinitely, I do want to remind you of the forgiveness that is available in Jesus, so you can take heart in that. You know, unfortunately, right now, most people don't have a problem with IVF. So as you're trying to warn other people about this effort to amend the Virginia Constitution, this is probably not where you want to focus, but I just wanted you all to be aware of that aspect of the issue. Now, turning back to abortion, we're going to look at some of the ways this measure would protect this fundamental right to abortion that it is designed to create. So to begin, the measure says that the right to abortion shall not be directly or indirectly denied, burdened, or infringed upon unless justified by a compelling state interest achieved by the least restrictive means. So not only is the government banned from protecting unborn children by actually prohibiting abortion, even creating a mere burden on the ability to get an abortion can be problematic under this measure. The abortion lobby may argue that anything that makes it take longer to get an abortion or makes an abortion more expensive is a burden. So if we are to have even a mere burden on this newly created right to abortion, it must be justified by a compelling state interest achieved by the least restrictive means. So what does that mean? This language, talking about a compelling state interest achieved by the least restrictive means, is a very well-known test in constitutional law, and it is commonly referred to as strict scrutiny. Okay, that is the toughest level of scrutiny that the courts apply to laws that interfere with the most important constitutional rights. And it is very, very hard for the government to survive this test. And that's intentional, because we don't want the government intruding on our core fundamental rights unless they absolutely have to. But normally when we think of core fundamental rights, we're thinking of things like our freedom of speech, not things like the ability to kill unborn children. And yet, here we are. And notably, the abortion lobby wasn't content to simply protect this ability to kill children with the same test that protects our freedom of speech. It actually wanted even greater protection for abortion. You see, normally a government attorney can go into court and they can argue that a law furthers a variety of interests. And they can try to convince the court, Your Honor, this interest is very, very important. It's so important that it is compelling and it justifies restricting this core constitutional right. But the abortion lobby didn't want to risk government lawyers being able to make good arguments that a judge finds persuasive. So they decided to provide a definition up front to confine what can qualify as a compelling state interest. So we're going to look at the definition. It says, a state interest is compelling only if it is for the limited purpose of maintaining or improving the health of an individual seeking care consistent with accepted clinical standards of care and evidence-based medicine, and does not infringe on that individual's autonomous decision-making. Okay, so they're trying to tie the hands of the government and saying, if you are going to have an abortion regulation that merely burdens abortion, the only way you can justify it is if it is to address the health of the pregnant mother. No other interests are going to be sufficient. So, say the government passed a law mandating that abortionists provide a lethal injection or anesthesia to a child before they start tearing that child's arms and legs off. The purpose of the law is so that the child won't suffer the horrific pain of being dismembered while alive. Well, under this measure, the abortion lobby could challenge such a law and say, well, does this law have as its purpose addressing the health of the pregnant mother? Oh, no? Therefore, it should automatically fail. There's nothing the government can do to spare the baby from this excruciatingly painful method of execution that is so barbaric that we would not allow it for slaughtering a farm animal for food or for executing the worst criminal on death row. If that wasn't bad enough, it gets worse. Even if an abortion regulation is about protecting the mother's health, it then has to be consistent with accepted clinical standards of care and evidence-based medicine. Well, guess what? The abortion industry will probably argue that their own clinical standards at their own abortion facilities are the accepted clinical standards. And they'll argue that the medical organizations that love abortion are the ones that have the true evidence-based medicine. So this is basically an attempt for the fox to guard the hen house. I have more bad news. In the law, a whole lot of mischief can be done with just one word. And the word I want to point out here is the word and. Okay? For a government interest to be compelling, it has to satisfy this health standard that we've discussed, and it has to not infringe on the pregnant mother's autonomous decision-making. So even if the government can successfully show, yes, this law actually really is quite essential for the pregnant mother's health, and it meets these clinical standards and evidence-based medicine, the abortion lobby can still try to get rid of the law by saying, well, it infringes on autonomous decision-making. We don't know what creative arguments they will come up with, but you could envision a law that is obviously very, very important for the pregnant mother's health. But then someone argues, well, this safety measure, it makes abortion too expensive. So maybe some women will feel they can't afford the abortion then, and that will interfere with their autonomous decision making. Maybe that would be an argument. Or maybe they'd say, well, this law that requires that a abortionist have a certain level of medical experience and education, that might be really, really important for the mother's health, but it could also prevent a mother from getting an abortion from the person she wants to get the abortion from. Maybe she wants her massage therapist or herb doctor to do the abortion. Does stopping that interfere with her autonomous decision making? So we could see arguments about that. So you could see how this measure could be used to block some really basic common sense measures that would even have been permitted under Roe versus Wade and the Casey abortion case. Let's talk about another extreme aspect of this measure, which is late-term abortions. So the measure says in part, the Commonwealth may regulate the provision of abortion care in the third trimester. So that may make some people think, well, this means that the state can protect all children in the third trimester. Well, not so fast. There's more language we need to look at, and we are going to look at it soon. But I want to pause and I want to emphasize that when you're talking to people about this measure, there may be some who, when you say, this is going to be abortion until birth, they would be like, oh, no, that this is just abortion in the first and second trimester of pregnancy. And if you're not able to convince someone that this is actually allowing abortion in the third trimester, I still want you to be equipped to show them that even if you were to accept their premise that this is just first and second trimester abortions, that this is still allowing very late-term abortions that would make many people uncomfortable, even if they consider themselves pro-choice. So, as Jane was mentioning earlier, and consistent with what one Planned Parenthood group says, the third trimester of pregnancy does not start until 27 weeks, according to Planned Parenthood. Okay, that means that this measure doesn't seem to allow for even the possibility of a law protecting an unborn child until that child reaches the gestational age of 27 weeks. So to illustrate how extreme that is, I want you to meet Curtis Means. Curtis is holding there in his hand a Guinness World Record certificate because of how early he was born, at a gestational age of just 21 weeks, 1 day. Doctors initially gave him less than a 1% chance of surviving. Yet he survived. He celebrated his 5th birthday this year, and he looks like he's a pretty happy kid. Guess what? Curtis is no longer the world record holder. Another child, Nash, assumed that distinction this year when he turned 1 after being born at exactly 21 weeks gestation, weighing only 10 ounces, less than a standard soda can. So we have babies being born at 21 weeks of pregnancy and surviving, and yet a state constitutional right to abortion in just the first and second trimester abortion would mean that you are not allowed to protect unborn children until they have grown and developed for about 6 weeks longer than Curtis and Nash had developed on the day that they were born. So we don't even need to talk about third trimester abortions to see that this measure would be allowing a state constitutional right to kill children who are sufficiently developed to survive outside the womb if they were simply delivered instead of killed on the day of the scheduled abortion. And let's not forget how these children are being killed. We watched the video clips of Dr. Levantino's congressional testimony where he described the abortion method of tearing limbs off of children, crushing their skulls. He said that this brutal method of killing is used roughly between 14 and 24 weeks gestation. Okay, so that is the method of abortion that would have probably been used to kill a child that were the same age as Curtis and Nash on the day they were born. So again, if people get hung up on this language that we saw, which says that the Commonwealth may regulate the provision of abortion care in the third trimester, and they insist, oh no, this is not abortion up until birth, you still have a compelling case to make. Because even if third trimester abortions are off the table, you can help them see how extreme and barbaric the measure still is, that it is out of step with the views of even many who call themselves pro-choice. But recall that I said there's more language we need to look at, and that's where abortion up until birth comes into play. So we're going to look at this full section here, and it says, the Commonwealth may regulate the provision of abortion care in the third trimester, provided that in no circumstance shall the Commonwealth prohibit an abortion that, in the professional judgment of a physician, is medically indicated to protect the life or physical or mental health of the pregnant individual, or when in the professional judgment of a physician, the fetus is not viable. So these are two classes of situations where third trimester abortions would be a state constitutional right. We're not going to discuss the second exception tonight, because while it is tragically wrong, it is sadly accepted by many. And so that's, again, not where you're going to want to be focusing in warning people about this measure. But this first exception is an area where you can help people who may consider themselves pro-choice to realize that this measure is probably too radical even for them. Because the first exception is saying you are allowed to have a third trimester abortion that is constitutionally guaranteed if the physician says the abortion is medically indicated to protect the mental health of the pregnant woman. That is an exception that is designed to swallow the rule. Don't be surprised if the abortion industry uses it to try to allow for essentially on-demand third trimester abortions. Because this is saying even in the third trimester of pregnancy, which is when all children have developed enough to have a very good chance of surviving outside the womb, they're saying you can still kill the baby instead of delivering the baby alive if a physician says killing the baby is necessary for the mother's mental health. And while some may argue, well, you know, no one is really saying that abortion should be allowed until birth, help them understand that is precisely what this measure is saying in its language. And to drive this point home, I'm going to show you a clip, or some clips, from a legislative exchange with one of your Virginia legislators, Delegate Kathy Tran, who was testifying for one of her pro-abortion bills back in 2019. So we're going to watch this as we consider the false claim that no one is advocating to allow for abortion until birth. Let's watch.
How late in the third trimester could a physician perform an abortion if he indicated it would impair the mental health of the woman?
Or physical health.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm talking about the mental health.
So, I mean, through the third trimester. The third trimester goes all the way up to 40 weeks.
Okay, but to the end of the third trimester.
Yep, I don't think we have a limit in the bill.
So, where it's obvious that a woman is about to give birth, she has physical signs that she is about to give a birth, would that still be a point at which she could request an abortion if she was so certified? She's dilating.
Mr. Chairman, that would be a decision that the doctor, the physician, and the woman would make.
I understand that. I'm asking
point.
if your bill allows that.
My bill would allow that, yes.
Well, that bill did not become law, but now something arguably even worse could end up in your Constitution. And like Delegate Tran's bill, this proposed constitutional amendment goes through the entire third trimester. So even if a woman has physical signs that she is about to give birth, abortion is still a possibility on the table for mental health reasons. Well, how bad do things have to get for a doctor to say, yes, we should kill the child at this very late stage of pregnancy for mental health? Different doctors will have different answers. But let's consider the view of one doctor, Dr. Leroy Carhart. He passed away 2 years ago, but he used to be rather infamous for killing children in the 3rd trimester. In fact, there's a few Supreme Court cases that have his name on it because he challenged laws prohibiting partial birth abortion. So let's watch this interview.
So how broadly do you define medical need?
It goes into financial health, social health. There's a large laundry list. But what's important to me is the woman has to tell me that it's going to destroy her life if she can't carry the baby, if she has to carry the baby.
Typically.
Anti-abortionists accuse him of carrying out unnecessary late gestation abortions, a charge he vehemently denies.
What counts as a medical need, in your view? I mean, if the woman is really stressed about her pregnancy,
I
qualify
think
her
it
for
has to get more to the point of depression, not just stress. And it is fit within my confidence of what we could do safely, I would do that.
right up until when? Late 38 weeks, 39 weeks?
I don't know.
That you're not comfortable saying?
No, I'm not going to say that. Yeah. To the fetus, it makes no difference whether it's born or not born. The baby has no input in this as far as I'm concerned.
But it's interesting that you use the word baby, because a lot of abortionists won't use that. They'll use the word fetus because they don't want to acknowledge that there's a life.
I think that it is a baby, and I use it with the patients.
And you don't have a problem with
Absolutely
killing
not.
a baby?
I have no problem if it's in the mother's uterus.
Notice that Dr. Carhart was asked, how would you define medical need? He wasn't even just asked like mental need, but just medical need for these late-term abortions. And he said, there is a long laundry list, including social health and financial health. So abortionists may argue that this health exception to kill babies when they're old enough to be born can be invoked for all sorts of reasons that tie into mental health. Well, would a doctor really do that? Well, Dr. Carhart would, and the abortion industry will likely argue that the physician who gets to make the determination about the mental health requirement being satisfied is the same physician performing the abortion. So you may have a situation where an abortionist can only make the thousands and thousands of dollars for these expensive late-term abortions if he certifies that this is necessary for the mental health of the mother. So what do you think this financially interested physician in this industry is going to say? Again, this can be up to the moment of birth, just as Delegate Tran admitted with her bill. Now, I know that Dr. Carhart did refuse to answer whether he would kill a child at 39 weeks, which is a child ready for full-term delivery. But why is it that you think he refused to answer? One thing he did admit is that he has no problem killing a baby if the baby is in his or her mother's uterus. Well, as you all know, a baby is in the mother's uterus until the child enters the birth canal for delivery or is delivered by C-section. So please, sound the alarm about this effort to constitutionalize killing children through all 9 months of pregnancy. When people are skeptical about this, you can tell them about people like Dr. Carhart, who specialize in late-term abortions even when there is no physical issue affecting the mother or the baby. You can also point out that the abortion lobby is pushing for third trimester abortions for a mother's mental health. Okay, why would that be? Why would they have that language that applies only to third trimester abortions if they were not contemplating killing children when the mother is physically healthy and the baby is physically healthy? So these are situations where children would be killed on a day that they had a very good chance of surviving if they were simply delivered instead of killed on the day of the scheduled abortion. Now, there's more we could say about this ballot measure. For instance, there is the concern that it may be used to argue that parents don't have a right to be involved or even aware if their young daughters are seeking abortions. Who knows what other type of destructive, creative arguments lawyers may assert if this becomes part of the Virginia Constitution. But our time is short and we have still some more things to cover. But I would just say, ultimately, if this extreme and dangerous measure passes all of the hurdles, abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy will be written into the Virginia Constitution. And the abortion industry wants this measure to pass so they can make more money by killing more children. And these babies' lives hang in the balance. So please try to save them. You now have critical information to share. You know more about this issue than most people do. So please share the information with your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, your classmates, those you worship with. Please do so in person and on social media. And in case you may be open to getting more formally involved, I'll tell you about an opportunity to try to stop abortion from going into the Virginia Constitution beyond just sharing with others. So Jane mentioned that your legislature has already voted once to put this deadly abortion measure on the ballot next year. But for the measure to actually make it onto the ballot, it needs to get passed through the legislature one more time after this year's election. So when the measure passed last time, it barely passed. So if your legislature became just a little bit more pro-life after this election, this deadly abortion measure could be defeated before it even makes it to the ballot. That would be wonderful and amazing. So if you want to try to make that happen, there's an opportunity to volunteer with the Family Foundation Action. So if you take out your phone and you scan this QR code that's on the screen, you can sign up to knock on doors or even make phone calls or send text messages from the comfort of your home to try to reach voters in key districts and try to ensure that you can have a legislature that will not allow this deadly measure to proceed any further. Early voting begins September 19th, which is tomorrow. So time is of the essence in reaching people with the truth. Now, before I told you about this volunteer opportunity, I was encouraging you to go out and share the truth with everyone you know about the value of unborn children, the evil of abortion, and about this dangerous effort to add abortion to the Virginia Constitution. So in addition to just sharing with people, I urge you to respectfully ask your pastor to preach clearly about abortion. When you make this request, you can use me as the excuse. You can let your pastor know that you heard that a lot of people are confused about abortion. You saw examples of how the abortion industry is misusing the Bible to try to convince people that they should support abortion, and that it would break your heart if the people you worship with every week, the people you care about so deeply, were to turn to abortion, to turn to the sin of having hands that shed innocent blood, simply because they heard the lies of the world and did not hear the truth from their church. So as you make this request to your pastor, one way to make it a little easier for you and your pastor is you can share a written sample sermon that the ministry I run, Reason for Life, has available for free at reasonforlife.org/sermon. And so you can download that, you can give it to your pastor and encourage them to preach the truth. Now, as you ask your pastor to preach about this, he may have some concerns. And so I'm going to just share with you about some of the concerns I commonly hear so that you can be prepared to help assuage those concerns. So for some pastors, the fact that people in the congregation have participated in an abortion is something that makes them hesitate to preach about the issue. Now, very understandably, they don't want to bring more pain to those who are already hurting from a past abortion. But the fact that many churchgoers are struggling with shame and guilt as a result of a past abortion is a reason to preach about the topic. We don't want to ignore people's wounds and let them fester. We want to help them find healing. And presenting about the sanctity of human life and God's forgiveness provides an excellent opportunity to help bring healing and freedom to those who are hurting and riddled with guilt and shame. And think about what a powerful moment it would be for those who have had an abortion, those who have encouraged or paid for an abortion, to hear from their pastor that Jesus loves them despite their past, and that when he died, he made the ultimate sacrifice for all of our sins, including the sin of abortion. and that the Lord desires for the women and men who have turned to abortion to turn to Him, to repent, to receive forgiveness, and to go forth to serve the Lord in amazing ways. You can also point out to your pastor that the fact that he knows that people do suffer following an abortion is yet another reason to warn people in the congregation to avoid traveling that path of sin and pain. What a tragedy it would be for people in the church to turn to that abortion, to kill their own child and suffer because they never heard the truth from their pastor. Speaking of the grief and shame that people often suffer following an abortion, I want to make sure you know that there are ministries like Broken from Silence that will help people for free as they seek emotional and spiritual healing following an abortion. So Broken from Silence will actually meet with people on video conferencing software like Zoom. So if you have a friend or family member anywhere in the country who's suffering with post-abortion grief, you can connect them with Broken from Silence and help them have the opportunity to walk through this multi-week Bible study for free over video conferencing software. And then at Blue Ridge Pregnancy Center, there's a post-abortion support group for those who you know locally who may be dealing with post-abortion grief. Another concern that pastors may have about sharing about abortion is that doing so will make them appear political, which I think is one of the scariest words in churches today. On this front, you can't dispute that abortion is a politically controversial issue, but you can remind your pastor, again, very respectfully, that this is first and foremost a biblical issue. It is an issue that is close to the heart of God because it involves the children He created in His image. And a pastor's responsibility to preach the truth of God's word does not end whenever a biblical truth becomes politically controversial. In fact, if a biblical teaching is politically controversial, that should be like a warning sign to pastors that this is a matter where there is much confusion and it's important to bring light and biblical clarity to this subject so that the congregation is not confused and so that they're prepared to go be salt and light in the world and stop the deception more broadly. We know that churchgoers are believing the lies about abortion, so we need to urge our pastors to step up and quell the confusion. If they don't, the flock that has been entrusted to them could be led away to the slaughter, the literal slaughter of their own children. So preaching about the subject is important to help people in the church know how to treat their own children and how to treat children in their communities. In Jeremiah 29, verse 7, God told the Israelites in Babylon, "Seek the peace of the city where I have caused you to be carried away captive, and pray to the Lord for it, for in its peace you will have peace." We should pursue peace. You can remind pastors that with abortion killing thousands of children every single day in America, there is violence, not peace. So we should pray for peace. We should pursue peace. And unlike the captives in Babylon or the Christians in the early church, we here in America have the privilege and great responsibility of being the government to a large extent. And if God is the Lord of all of our lives, He should be the Lord of our vote as well. So as a congregation participates in the weighty business of government, they should be equipped to make God-honoring decisions. Now, a pastor may tell you, you've made some interesting points here, but I'm focused on the gospel, not on politics. Well, it's very good for pastors to focus on the gospel. And it just so happens that equipping people to view the issue of abortion through a biblical lens is part of fulfilling the Great Commission. Jesus said in Matthew 28, verses 19 and 20, "Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you." So pastors and each one of us should help people understand and observe the commands to not murder and to love their neighbors as themselves, and help them see how those commands apply when it comes to our treatment of unborn children. Consider this. If there was an effort to make it a state constitutional right for others to kill us, what would we do? I think we would do everything we could to make sure that failed. And we are commanded to love our neighbors as ourselves. We see in the book of Esther in the Bible how a decree went out from the king for the people of the provinces to kill the Jewish people. So Queen Esther went before the king to plead for the lives of her people. In doing so, she violated the law and risked the death penalty. But as she said in Esther 4, verse 16, if I perish, I perish. So she understood the stakes, and she was willing to do what needed to be done, no matter the cost. The Jewish people as a whole also had a sense of urgency. At Esther's request, they did not eat or drink for 3 days because they were in prayer and fasting for Esther's efforts to succeed. But what are we willing to do to save others? What are our pastors willing to do? Thankfully, pastors and each one of us are not being asked to break the laws. But there is a need to go outside of our comfort zone and suffer some inconveniences. That is what true love requires. Proverbs 31, verses 8 through 9 instructs, open your mouth for the speechless, in the cause of all who are appointed to die. Open your mouth, judge righteously, and plead the cause of the poor and needy. Well, if we think about it, there are none more oppressed, vulnerable, and needy here in the United States than unborn children. They can't run away from the danger that confronts them. They cannot not even utter a single word in their own defense. They depend on others to speak for them. They depend on us, brothers and sisters. So let's go forth from here and show love to our unborn neighbors whose lives hang in the balance by being their voice. In speaking for them, we will not only show love to the children in the womb, but also to our neighbors outside the womb by helping them choose life and righteousness rather than death, sin, and suffering.